All right, so first of all, welcome, certainly on behalf of MOSHAPE with our president, Dr. Dennis Dochev, and certainly with our president-elect, Dr. Patrick Fine. We want to welcome you to this very special presentation. Today's going to be pretty interesting as we get enlightened on the SHAPE America Reentry Considerations. And just a little bit of housekeeping, first and foremost. We have a Q&A that we want people to use that they can talk amongst each other. And then there's also, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's going to be a Q&A function of which we will have a Q&A live at the end of this presentation. So that's the differences between the two chat boxes, if you would. We certainly want to give a huge shout out to the SAM group. I understand you guys had an amazing meeting last week on Thursday and Friday. So we want to welcome all of those that are from the SAM group, as well as our MOSHAPE members. You guys are the best in the country. We want to thank you guys for coming on board. And without a further ado, what I'd like to do is just get started. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We are joined first and foremost by Tom Loughrey. As most of you know, Tom is the MOSHAPE Executive Director. And Tom, I'm just so glad to have you on board on this panel. Also joined by Laura Beckmann. Laura is the Director of the Missouri Healthy Schools grant through Distanci. And then last but not least, we're also going to be joined by Sean Nevills. Sean is the Director of Health and Physical Education at the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And last but not least, my name is Guy Danoff, and I'll be moderating today's session. I happen to be the Director of Digital Media and Promotions here at MOSHAPE. I also do some work with the Missouri Healthy Schools, as well as SHAPE America themselves, more related to the strategy part of the brainstorming. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Tom, we're going to start out right away as we look at, as you guys can see here, this is a 30-page document. This is the SHAPE America School Reentry Considerations, K through 12. And Tom, here's the big question. Why is today, amongst COVID, why is schools, the physical education and health education, a must or a top priority for students during COVID? Obviously, we're in unprecedented times, but why is this so important that we must advocate in using documents such as these as we move forward in the fall?
Well, thank you, Guy. And first of all, it's very, very clear of the many benefits that result from regular participation in physical education. And when you look at the health education and the physical education curricula, there are many skills and knowledges to be learned that will contribute to a healthy lifestyle. And we can piggyback with the epidemic, where we're emphasizing cleanliness, sanitation, taking care of yourself, and watching out for others. So we feel that the timing is correct. And we also feel that our subject matter is very important. We could devote 5 hours to talking about why children need physical education, health education in the schools. But when we look at it, state requirements are very important. And we're very happy that ESSA defined or redefined the school curricula and included health education and physical education as part of a well-rounded education, therefore allowing for grants and funding for professional development. We also take part of our cue from the WISC model that we are so strongly involved with. And that looks at the tenets of the healthy child, the safe child, the supported child, the engaged and the challenged child, as well as school policy. So and this is a part of a school policy. Many state education groups have time requirements. Ours in Missouri is very weak, but we make the best of it. And so when we look at this, we're trying to teach behaviors that will help a child, whether they're in school, whether they're in our classes, or wherever environment they can be. Next, Sean. Thank you. There's no shortage of documented evidence. Some of us just got done reading John Rady's book, Go Wild. And when you look at Rady's contributions, Chuck Hillman's contributions with brain scans, we can develop pages and pages of information. But we also look at the SHAPE documents. SHAPE has a wonderful set of resources for each of us to use, and these can be used prior to going in and meeting with your administrator. And when you collect all these documents, the CDC Healthy Youth site, the infographics, and one of the things that's critically important is that when we talk with administrators, we talk from a position of strength. Part of that position of strength comes from the National Association of State Boards of Education. And so, as they say, education and health are inextricably integrated. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see the points that the National Association of State Boards of Education laid out for us. Sean, thank you. They provide 4 important points. Providing more opportunities will help them in improved cognitive function, positive effects on academic performance. We have many pieces of evidence that support all those. And the time spent in the school day helps provide students with the knowledge of a physically active lifestyle education. The health benefits have a tremendous impact on later healthcare costs. Providing a range of opportunities to enjoy after school activity, again, promotes the social skills, the SEL skills, and the ability to adapt and to deal with things. So you've got the source there at the bottom. It would be good to have a copy of that when you go into talk with your administrators. Next then. Every opportunity we have to interact and communicate with administrators, with the public, with parents, with colleagues, involves advocacy. Every professional is an advocate every day by what you say and what you do. And you can look at the high quality materials that Carly Wright has put together on the SHAPE America website with the advocacy materials. Each state has their own advocacy site. And our MOSHAPE site was so well defined with how-to documents that it's critically important that when you advocate, you're talking about the value of your program, you're talking with talking points. You go in and you list the points that you want to make and how you're going to do that. It's critically important that we have evidence. You have to be able to show what your program has done. I've been involved in working with 2 different school districts where evidence made all the difference. In one large school district of 18,000 students, we had to provide a state of the curriculum report and a student progress report. And we relied on data that was collected from all teachers in the district. And we presented that so that they could see how students were able to achieve the goals of the program. I've been able to work with Laura for more than 15 years. And when she had the PEP grant in the Ferguson-Florissant School District, the final report that was given in June 2010 detailed data from 563 different data points that teachers keyed in for every student during the year. But more than that, she was able to demonstrate how certain health behaviors related to behavior, school attendance, and academic achievement. At the end of that school board meeting, not only did the school board give her a standing ovation, but the budget for the program was increased dramatically. So having evidence and going into the action, you can connect with your SHAC, your School Health Advisory Council, be an active part in that and take a lead. So again, those are some of the things that we need to do for advocacy. And the other thing that has been very helpful, and I have to give credit to both Sean and Laura for this. MOSHAPE is a partner in the Healthy Schools Grant. By having 2 people in these administrative positions, and because of the fact that Missouri has an 1801 grant with CDC, the Missouri Healthy Schools Grant, Laura and Sean were deeply involved in meetings with CDC officials. And when the first draft of the reentry guidelines came out, one of the items that stuck out immediately was cancel PE, cancel music, cancel art. We went back to the drawing board and they were able to set up collaborative work with the Missouri School Boards Association and with CDC. And so I have to give them credit for taking the lead on reaching out to all these different groups and making sure that our voice was heard. Thank you.
So Laura, I want to address this next question to you. It's kind of loaded, as you could imagine. Obviously, these school reentry considerations are intended simply to guide administrators, certainly look at the guiding staff and teachers as they prepare this fall for an environment for a safe and a supportive instruction using one of these three models of learning. And I know you're going to talk about two of them, and Sean will grab the other one on the back end of this. So I was wondering if you could kind of weigh in certainly on these three models of learning.
Absolutely. So the school-wide reentry considerations that were developed were basically from the development of the CDC and the White House opening up America. So there were three phases in that. So you have your low risk, which is meaning that you have virtual only, which is what Sean will be speaking to, the distance learning only, which means that you have a lot of high cases in your community. You also have your medium risk, which is moderate to high cases, but that means you're placing mitigation strategies in place. So like the phase 2. And then phase 3 is high risk, meaning going back to a traditional setting of schools. So most of our school districts in Missouri, as well as across the nation, is that we are seeing the downward trends of cases in COVID, but sometimes you see a little bit of upward trends going on in different regions, depending on where the cases are. And so through these reentry plans, what a lot of districts are thinking about is the phase 2. That is starting out with a reentry plan where mitigation strategies are in place and that we can have a plan that we would reduce transmission and exposure and keeping our kids healthy. So right now for school-wide reentry considerations, which has pulled a lot from the CDC considerations for schools, which was just released in May 19, 2020, a lot of your superintendents in the state of Missouri are having conversations and they're talking about preparation and implementation of reentry plans with multiple stakeholders, not just in them as state leaders, but with staff, with the State Department of Education on looking at reentry plans. What are the protocols that you would follow to keep your students and staff safe? So for example, looking at the protocols such as stopping the spread, teaching children and staff how to wash their hands properly, having protective measures in place like masks at certain times of transitioning when you're closer than 6 feet apart, how to teach kids how to properly wear them, not touching your faces. The CDC has several different tools and resources that school districts can use to post visual signs, to communicate with families, so on and so forth. It's really important that your school districts also have new protocol training that also talks to the families as well as the staff on what to do and students. There should be professional development on multiple models of learning because in the fall, there is a chance during the winter months, because we do not have a vaccine and we have no herd immunity, that means that there is a chance that the rise of this COVID-19 could come back. And if it does, we have to be ready for distance learning and go back to a phase 1 approach. So it's tied to those 3 phases, and all districts should be talking to their departments of education or their health departments on looking at these different types of phases based on community. Why is it important for that? Because the reason we're doing this mitigation is because we have what's called contact tracing. So if we keep kids in small groups, then it is really easy for the Department of Health to figure out where that kid and who that kid had contact with, or that staff member, to trace back to where it could have come from. So that's the purpose of this mitigation, is because of the contact tracing for COVID-19 that we desperately need to stop the exposure, okay? And that person, of course, would be on quarantine for 14 days, and whoever was exposed to that person on quarantine for 14 days. The in-school instruction with physical distancing basically is around major components of how to maintain distancing, sanitation practices, how do you accommodate sick students? So nurse stations are coming up with alternate places to put students or staff that look like they're having COVID symptoms, right? How do we monitor the patterns of illness? How do we make sure that our students with chronic disease, our staff that are high risk with chronic disease, how do we make sure that we are accommodating them? Keeping our kids in static groupings where they're not moving around so much in pods will reduce that contact tracing. It will reduce the exposure to multiple people. Reducing visitors to the building, and also large events. Do we schedule them or not? If we're in phase 2, we could maybe have up to 50 people. If we're in phase 1, we can only have up to 10. So again, it's really looking at each region and each school community based on where they are and what phase and approach they will be in at that time. But they should be ready for all 3. Next slide. So considerations for health and physical education, there are 4 components. And you'll see in the considerations for the physical environment, really what this means is we're looking at the facilities. What outdoor, indoor facilities do you have? What are your class sizes? They should be comparable to what all the other class sizes are. Students should have a 6 foot apart. Keeping in mind that respiration rates do increase that respiration droplet. So thinking about those students when they're exercising, the distance, and what types of activities would you do more outdoor than you would indoor? Because you have to think about planning your instruction, the visual aids, so you can reduce cross-contamination, or visual aids for managing transition of students from the classroom to the field, from the classroom to the gym. You have to be able to walk your kids through that. Looking at dress out time, do we have kids dressing out? Going to personal hygiene, the exit and entry of your class, teaching students to have proper hygiene, how to have proper respiration etiquette. In other words, if they're sneezing, what would they do? If they're, washing their hands, or they sneezed on their hands, what do they do? Face coverings. Do they really need them? Face coverings you do not need unless you are in between stations, 6 feet in front of 6 feet apart. So obviously, if you have your students spread out, and even more so outdoors, you're at less risk of transmission. So spreading them out, you do not have to have masks. Hydration, kids bringing their own water bottles. School nurses, having that conversation with them about your asthma and your chronic condition students, and realizing about the stigma that may go along with students who can't wear face masks. There are some students that will not be able to wear them. As far as equipment and safety and sanitation, again, you should be talking to your district's facilities managers have already determined disinfectant practices. Matter of fact, DESE already has an ordering space where districts can go in and order masks, order sanitation products. So that's already set up for them. Taking an inventory of your equipment and making sure you have enough equipment for every child, but you can reuse the equipment. Looking at the type of equipment and how easy it is to sanitize. And even when you go out, when I'm talking to the medical doctors of infectious disease from WashU, even when you have children in small pods, you may be able to use equipment, for example, a Frisbee back and forth with 2 people. As long as those children are disinfecting before they go out and use the equipment and after they come back in. But to reuse equipment, you do need to sanitize. For any equipment that's cloth, you would launder. So thinking about those kinds of things when you're looking at safety and sanitation, and your facilities managers will be able to help you with that. There is some concern about the overuse of disinfectants, and we do need to make sure we don't put disinfectant on equipment that children would put in their mouths, obviously, and keep it safely stored. For instructional strategies, you know, making sure we address all the 5 standards. You might heavily focus on more that's more related to COVID-19 type activities, determining based on the phases that you're in. Teachers use microphones and speakers. If you are within 6 feet or more from your students, you do not need a mask, okay? Individual versus team activities, games and activities with no contact. Student choice, suggested activities, and space of instruction. Always thinking about how would you plan your instruction in each phase, in an A-B schedule, in a virtual manner versus a face-to-face manner. So those are some things to consider. And that's strongly through physical education. Through health education, you would follow the classroom strategies. The next slide that Sean has shared is really about our Missouri School Reentry Physical Education, Physical Activity, and Sports that we are working with Missouri School Board Association. This is a living document. It changes. The more we find out and the more we're talking to our infectious disease doctors that we're working with at WashU, you may see some changes here. There may be some adaptations to the number of times that you clean and disinfect. So again, they are very, very strongly in support of what we do and want our students to be able to be active and have physical education and health education in schools. The next one is a nice map that Jamie Sparks and Kim Ballard have put together. There are many states out there that have now, Missouri was one of the first ones to create the reentry guidelines, but all the other states are beginning to follow suit. And of course, you know, you learn and you share from others. So I would suggest and encourage everyone to go into other states' plans and look what they're doing. See some of the ideas that they're coming up with. It's really nice to hear from them and share, and everybody has some strengths to their plans. The other one, the last one that was just released, it's hot off the press today. CDC is in partnership with Kaiser Permanente, and they're now developing a playbook for school reopening. They just finished their first chapter. There will be more chapters coming up in July for school districts to utilize around the physical education, health education, and physical activity areas, including sports and extracurricular activities.
Thank you, Laura. Hey, Laura, really quick, we got a question from Christy Lee, and she asked, how do we keep students in grouping pods in the high school setting?
Good question. I think the high schools are still working that out on how they're going to do that. And again, I haven't heard a lot about the high school. I think a lot of the elementary have figured it out. I do know that Jennings School District has a great plan in place, but they're still talking about that. I don't know what the conversations are around the high school as much specifically, but I do know there are a lot of conversations about the different formats of teaching and learning that they will be utilizing.
Thank you.
So that's a good question. And when I get more information, I would be happy to share.
And certainly we will, guys. We're obviously recording these now. I want to pivot and shift. Sean, as you know, you and I had a chance to talk beforehand, and there's really kind of three big areas that the SHAPE America Reentry Considerations, really kind of start to get even deeper on. I was wondering if you could address these three. The first one is going to be on, what are the considerations for locker rooms? I know that's a big question a lot of schools are asking, especially in PE. Secondly, that distance learning piece, especially when you start looking about distance learning and looking at that for, equipment, considerations. And then last but not least, something that I know that we talk about all the time, that's certainly going to be SEL. So I was wondering if you could, kind of address these questions that as we looked at the SHAPE America Reentry Considerations, that we want to kind of add more to the discussion on those areas.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. And thanks SHAPE America for providing our educators with this document. And things I'll speak to, are a part of this SHAPE America school reentry guidance documents or recommendations, And when you talk about the locker room recommendations, the first thing is that you want to advise students to come prepared to class as, dressed, ready to go. That's either indoors or outdoors. But when it comes to the structural level, schools should probably eliminate the locker room usage. There's a lot when it comes to sanitation, cleanliness that will go into it. And it's a really extra layer when students are in the locker room that they have to be cleaned afterwards or between classes or, during the day. A lot of extra work involved there. And then also you may want to consider loosening or eliminating your physical education dress code. Once again, it's one of those things tying back to the very first bullet point there is having students come prepared. So, if the locker rooms, if you're not going to use your locker rooms, then also think about if you're using, dressing out as a way of assessing students or grading students, loosen that, allow them the opportunity to just come to class prepared or eliminate it altogether. But we do know that certain areas, states, districts operate differently, and they may still decide that they want to use their locker room. So if you're gonna use your locker rooms, have a plan, right? Have a plan. First and foremost, you want to consult with your local, district, state level, your COVID-19 team, okay? That can be your administrative team in your schools and your buildings and your districts. That may be your local health department, okay? But have a plan in place to collaborate with these people when it comes to the possibility of scheduling sanitation and cleaning periods. Also, if you decide that, give your students guidance, okay? They're gonna go to school, they're gonna be ready and excited to probably be active again, but you have to go through the steps with them. Once again, everybody's in this together and they're a part of that. So make sure they understand the protocol when they go into the locker room, how much time they have, where things should be placed. Going back to Laura's point, the hygiene aspect, maybe you need to have some products available for students to address their hygiene before, during, after class, right? And then also make sure you're practicing those procedures and transitions, okay? You want everything to run as smooth as possible. And Guy, one other point I want to talk about are the drinking fountains, okay? That's another thing that if you're going to use them, they have to be cleaned frequently and sanitized. Or you may decide that you don't have water fountains in your school, or you're using them for physical education, and students are bringing their own water. Okay, to the point of distance learning. All right, kind of going back to what Laura was talking about on her last bullet point previous there is working towards distance learning, okay? And what's important and how do you go through those steps? Once again, in the document, the first piece there is developing connections, okay? That is going to matter so much in this school year that we rebuild those connections with our students before we really just, you know, try to teach things and hammer standards and things. We have to build our connections again, because we lost a lot of time with our students in the months they were not in school. Ways you can do that: create assignments, focus on getting to know each other, facilitate pen pals, some way that they're engaging with the teachers and then they're engaging with each other. Access your curriculum, determine lessons that can be adapted to be completed at home or online. Once again, back to Laura's point, we don't know, or there's a possibility that COVID once again springs up on us and schools may have to close. So make sure you have things that, lessons that you have prepared that you can do in class, or for students that can do at home or online. Communicate your expectations, okay? The what matters in your class? What are the standards, the objectives you are targeting in each lesson? Where, if you're doing distance learning, where can they find those? What platforms are you using for your distance learning? How, if they have assignments, how are they going to submit it? Is it a written copy? Is it a Word document? Is it a video? Is it a journal? Things like that. And then if they're having problems, technical issues of access, make sure you are also preparing them for that as well, and you're available to your students in those moments. Create consistency, okay? Even in a virtual environment, you can create consistency where they have regular daily routines and procedures that they follow. That's going to matter just as much as the social emotional piece, and that we're reestablishing routines for students even in the distance learning environment. And then make content accessible for all learners, okay? If you think about modifications, think about your students that have individualized programs, your English language learners, students like that. Offer choice, okay? This is our time to be adaptable, offer students opportunities to show their competency in different ways in health and physical education. And then as well, variety, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the assessment piece, but giving them variety once again to demonstrate their competence. So going back to our part on the social emotional learning and considerations, this is the most important part, especially when you get back into the building with the schools and everything they have gone through during this time, just like we have as well. And effective health and physical education programs create a foundation that benefits the whole child, okay? So considerations for that, first and foremost, is prepare for regression, okay? By fall, by the time students are back in the building, they probably have been gone, unless you had summer school, up to 5 months. It's a lot of time, a lot of learning missed. So prepare for that regression, the social and emotional regression, but also the skill competence and the fitness confidence. There is an article published through the Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, that said if this continues on, that students and childhood obesity will increase 2.4%. Okay, now that might not seem like a big number, but see that number in each individual student and what all they lost, the learning, the fitness, everything. Okay, addressing social emotional learning in your curriculum. Find the parts, the strengths that you have when it comes to your health and physical education curriculums. Where are the gaps in your curriculum where you can incorporate social and emotional learning to address the needs of your students, especially as they're reentering schools? Once again, going back to using daily routines. If you are in school setting, in-person setting, thinking about a morning circle, or you can even do that on Zoom. Instant activities, warm-up activities, introductions, closures, natural transitions for students to prepare them for what's next in your class to ease that anxiety they may have. Then working with other staff members to share SEL-specific skills being taught. Laura talked about that, Tom talked about that. You have your school counselor, your nurse, your social worker in the building or maybe in the community, a school psychologist or maybe a psychologist in the community. Teachers, librarians, all of these people matter in the process of addressing the social and emotional needs of your students. And then a couple of resources we have, particularly for the curriculum, is the Health and Physical Education SEL Crosswalk, which is available on SHAPE America's free download. And then also the Core SEL Competencies, which is available on castle.org. Going back to the last bullet I talked about, what Tom definitely talked about is the WISC model, okay? And creating that cadre, that team of people that are there to benefit these students. And every time I look through the WISC model, I like to look at the first top. If you read it like a clock, at 1 and 2 o'clock, you have health and physical education. We have the opportunity to be champions in this model. But then when you go around, you have every other organization or group that you can bring in, your nutritional services in your building, your nurses health servicing, the counseling piece, the social emotional climate, how is that being addressed in your building? Laura talked about the physical environment and how to make that functional during this time of COVID. Employee wellness, always make sure you're checking on yourself and your colleagues as well. And then also the family and the community engagement piece to that. Then the last part for me right now, here's the trauma-sensitive learning environment. And once again, I say it and I'll keep saying it, strong relationships and connections with students are the heart of creating trauma-sensitive learning environments. And creating a trauma-sensitive learning environment, particularly in health and physical education, will be imperative to help students ease the impact of trauma in their life. Once again, everybody's been through something different during this time. How are you going to address that? Okay, couple considerations for that. Once again, provide opportunities for students to connect to each other, to you. You can do daily, weekly, bi-weekly check-ins, peer groups, a predictable setting or routine. We talked about that. Create opportunities for choice and voice for students, but also evaluating the current student behavior management. What structures are in place in your school? What is your discipline policies look like? Okay, maybe now is the time where you start considering or start researching restorative practices, ways to build up students and have positive interactions, maybe when they're going through a negative time. And then last, assessing their emotional needs, but more importantly, assessing your needs. Because if we can't be our best, then how can we be our best for our students? So making sure that you're checking on your students, but you're also checking in on yourself.
Oh, thank you, Sean. I mean, there's a lot there, especially with that SEL model. Nice job certainly framing the WISC model. Now what we want to do is, as we're starting to kind of wind down, as we're talking about, again, these key points of the SHAPE America Reentry Considerations, and that leads us into documentation. I know that this is of particular interest to those involved, certainly in administration, but I'm going to ask Tom and Sean to kind of address this, as they're going to talk about using a backward planning model to develop assessments and also for goal setting. And Tom, why don't you kick us off on this very important area, speaking directly to assessment?
Well, one of the things that we've talked about almost every time we get together, Guy, is the triple D. Data drives decisions. And in the absence of data and verifiable data, you're at a loss when it comes to being able to advocate and promote your program and to describe the benefits. So again, this is one of the things that helps with the status of your program and the support for your program. With all of the documents that we have now, it's very important to start with backward design, and it's critically important to have all aspects of your curriculum, health education and physical education, aligned with your state standards and your national standards. And you must be able to show that that is what you're doing. I was fortunate to be on a group that started in 1986, and our goal, the charge that we were given would be to develop a national curriculum K-12 in 1 year. We decided we couldn't do that. They should reconstitute the committee, but NASP allowed us to extend our timeline. And Hal Lawson, one of our committee members, as we were looking at what we wanted to do, Hal started looking at the backward design. What does the product of our program look like? When a person graduates from high school, will they have achieved the goals, the benchmarks, or the learner outcome statements that we consider to be valuable? We do that when we look at career readiness. Such a high number of our students, when they graduate, are not ready for a career because of criminal background, drug and alcohol use, unhealthy behaviors. And so Hal Lawson, in viewing all that we had on the table, said, the physically educated person has skills sufficient to participate in a variety of physical activities, is physically fit, does participate regularly, knows the costs, obligations, and benefits of participating in activity, and values the benefits that derive from physical activity. Now, those definitional statements have changed slightly over this 30-year period of time. But what this does, we look at the endpoint, and then we work backwards. In order to achieve this, what do they have to have at each grade level going down? Then we work back to make sure that everything is developmentally appropriate. We have so many documents that guide us in this. We have state documents. Virtually all states have assessment plans or requirements. For example, in Missouri, we have a fitness reporting requirement that all schools, it's a part of their data management. Assessment is necessary. You cannot grade on attendance, attitude, and effort. You must grade and assess on the basis of, did the student achieve these outcomes that are a part of our program? We have our national standards and grade level outcomes from SHAPE America. SHAPE America also has their essential components of physical education, 4 important factors in student assessment. And in the appropriate practices guidelines, a side-by-side comparison, all of these can be accessed on the SHAPE America resource pages. And this shows what's appropriate for assessment and inappropriate for assessment. So when you're doing your curriculum work, you have to make sure that that's all set there. And then what items have to be reported to the State Department of Education? That's critically important. So then it's also important to focus on each domain. It's, of course, psychomotor domain is major in what we do, but also the cognitive domain. And one of the things that I mentioned in last week's SAM meeting, the Society of Association Managers, the state level leaders, was that we are not doing our job when a 30-year-old has to enroll in a fitness center and hire a personal trainer. If a person graduates from our program without the knowledge and the skills and the ability to execute and plan their own personal exercise program based on appropriate standards and guidelines, we've lost. So there's a lot that we have to do with cognitive learning and affective. That's sometimes the lost thing, but the affective domain tells us how values are developed. And level 5 of the affective domain simply is called characterization. Your behaviors characterize what your values are. And so there is a step-by-step process to do there. How do we grade progress in achieving learning goals? Each district has their own grading rubrics and styles, but make sure that you're consistent across all schools in the district and that align with standards. And one of the important aspects that you do for accountability is you report the achievement of the students in your program. Some schools have growth plans. You have a number of different things that affect your particular school district. At the end of the year, if your school board calls you into the meeting and said, how well did students achieve your goals for your curriculum? What data do you have to show that they did? And if they didn't, what kind of remediation is provided? So again, when we talk about SEL, social emotional learning, I had the ability to work with Don Hellison during the early part of his career. And he has some wonderful rating scales in his book on personal responsibility education. What measure do we have to guide the achievement of SEL goals? As Sean said, if you go to the CASEL website, they will give you a lot of information about how you can look at reaching your SEL goals. And then what kind of a toolbox do you have? As a teacher in physical education, you do not have textbooks. But when the school district sets up their textbook budget, why don't you ask for a series of books? And we have a resource list for health education, resource list for physical education that every teacher should have. That way, when you go into your curriculum meetings, in your district meetings, everyone has the tools available to assess and report whether you do project-based learning, flipped classroom, portfolios. This was one of the things that worked so well when Laura was the PEP grant director, and personal logging participation, so many things that they can do on their phone, on other devices. So that's what we have to be able to look for to make sure that we get on with doing that.
So yeah, Tom, I'll go ahead and just wrap up your part of the student assessment piece. Is that assessment can happen many different ways. You can do it for the students' learning by providing them feedback, ways that they can improve, or there's assessment of learning where you're thinking about the skill demonstration of things, the tangible things that they can show you. Once again, going back to Tom's point, is using that backward planning to develop assessments, identifying your goals and then working your way from there. Provide a variety of assessments. Going back to my piece earlier, providing a variety of assessments that address all of the standards. Standards 1 through 5 for physical education, and then 1 through 8 for health education. And then offer opportunities for students to choose how they will demonstrate their knowledge and skills. Once again, written, video, journaling. It is an equitable choice, an equitable approach to assessing students. Once again, we're evolving here. So how can we reach all of our students in a variety of ways and evolve our ways of assessment? Then there's the use of formative assessments, which determines student knowledge and their learning processes. How does that student learn? Like Tom said, every student learns differently in different domains or has strengths in those different domains. And then also using simple rubrics to determine how students will be assessed and on what. It's simple as a checklist of what things matter when a student is in your classroom or they're in the virtual environment. Then once again, what are they doing for that day? What are they being assessed on? And we here at MOSHAPE, we do have a couple of webinars available if you'd like to know more about formative assessments and simple rubrics that we did back this previous month.
All right, guys. Want to thank you guys for doing a fantastic job, but I think you guys should have one last word. So what we're going to do, guys, we put up the contact information, obviously, for Tom, Laura, and Sean. You can see their Twitter handles. You can also email them directly if you have questions. But I figured we'd take this time to do, as you guys know, with my sports media background, we're going to do your parting shots. And Laura, obviously, we'd like to start with you ladies first. Laura, you got to unmute.
I got to unmute myself. Just so everybody knows that the MSBA document is a living document, and that there are changes that will continue to be made if necessary based on the scientific evidence that we're learning more and more about the COVID. In addition to that, think of it as Swiss cheese, that the more you're layering the cheese, the more you are providing more safety measures for your students and less risk of exposure for yourself and your students. In addition, next steps, we are going to be having a lot of trainings. We are partnering with a lot of experts around the state on reentry considerations with Missouri PTA, the Missouri School Board Association, the School Plant Managers Association, the School Nutrition Association. And so all of these organizations are coming together, and we're working with MOSHAPE as well with common communication and messaging, and wanting to provide you more training to answer your frequently asked questions. So this is coming up, that we will be providing a PD platform with a lot of experts around our state to provide weeds. Let's get in the weeds and let's give you what you really need. How can we help you? How can we support you?
Thank you, Laura. All right, Sean, let's get your parting shot.
So Guy, you know, I have to dig back into my coaching background, right? And give
of course you do.
So I'll start mine with a quote that's kind of been floating around many different ways, but it's "Don't let a serious crisis go to waste." Okay, right now we are all fortunate to have opportunities for growth and evolution during this time. But I particularly want to talk about three separate opportunities. And the first opportunity came when schools first closed, whether it was the end of March, early April. And even though schools closed and students were not physically in the building, that was an opportunity to let your administrators, your students and families know that health and physical education and our teachers, we're still here for you. And here at MOSHAPE, we showed success in that by launching Chalk Your Walk. And hopefully your state has a chance to participate and share that message with us. The second opportunity is happening right now. Okay, education is currently evolving right in front of our eyes. And as health and physical educators, it's our opportunity right now to reimagine and redefine our profession. We have an opportunity to share the importance of health and physical literacy with our districts, our schools, in the homes of families, but more importantly, in the hearts of our students. And then the third opportunity, that opportunity will come this fall. You will have tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of young eyes directed at you, either virtually or in person. Students may be anxious, nervous, fearful, but they'll be ready to listen and learn. You, teachers, you may be anxious, fearful, nervous, but you'll be ready to teach and you'll be ready to listen. But in that moment, when you have those tens, hundreds, maybe thousands of eyes directed at you, ready to receive your words, remember this. We here at MOSHAPE, your state leaders, and our national leadership at SHAPE America, we got you. And together, we got this.
Sean, nicely said. I think you got a couple of hashtags out of that even. As you know, being the social media guy, I love it. But thank you so much. Great perspective. Certainly love the coach mode of Sean Nevills. I like that. All right, last but not least, our executive director, Dr. Tom Loughrey. Tom, what's your parting shot?
Oh my, following those two, you can see how proud I am at this stage of my life to be able to work with these young minds and creative energies. And together, we all are on the same page. We have a saying that we share a brain, and what one doesn't think of, the other one does. And Guy, your support has been phenomenal. And behind the scenes, we have Mary Dreemeyer, who is just a solid part of our organization. In my 58 years in education, that doesn't include the 22 or 17 that I spent in education before I started becoming a teacher. We've been faced with challenges. We've been faced with barriers. But whenever a barrier is put in our way, that's when the creative juices start. We find a way to climb over the barrier, dig underneath it, or work around it. And I've seen cutbacks in programs. I've seen reductions in force, but that just makes us aware of how we have to have documentation to show that what we do is critically important to the health of the nation and to the communities in which we work. It's been a pleasure for me to see this happening. I was 65 years old when I started online teaching at a university. And over the next 11 years of doing that, I taught synchronous, asynchronous. We were able to get better assessment, better engagement by creating new avenues for students and learners to connect with us and for us to provide important information. I know this is going to happen. I just want the country to know how great these people are that I work for. And it makes me so proud to wake up in the morning, see what they're going to throw at me so we can find out ways to get it done. Guy, thanks a million for this. Laura, we've been partners for a long time. Sean, I wish that you and I would have been partners the last 50 years. You contribute so well. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Tom. And at this point, guys, we'll take a few live Q&A questions. So if you got a couple of questions, feel free to put them right there in the Q&A chat. and we'd be happy to, take a field of a couple of questions. And while we're waiting, Laura, I do want to address this because you've got something coming up on July 13th that you're part of, and this actually came from our president, Dr. Dochef. I know you answered in the chat, but I do want everyone to hear this. With recommendations / regulations put on physical distancing, how can schools justify extracurricular sports? In other words, who will monitor the sports programs and adherence? And I was wondering if you can kind of address that based on what's going to happen on July 13th.
Well, you will have your after school programs are run through the after school network. We have Missouri After School Network, our 21st Century programs. We have our YMCAs. The Boys and Girls Club have come up with some great guidelines to do these types of things with physical activity and extracurricular activities. So the guidelines are very similar. The physical activity guidelines are very similar to what physical education is. It's just that, and the the Federation of High School, is it NFSHS? They have guidelines for sports programs. The Olympic Games have guidelines for their trainings. There's a lot of information out there. And if you go to the considerations for schools documents by CDC on their webpage, they have tons of information around camps and programs like that.
Laura, or this is actually to the panel, question just came up from Stephanie. She asked a really good question. Any guidelines or best practices that anyone could share regarding recess?
The guidelines, also SHAPE America has released those reentry guidelines in their document, in the reentry guidelines or considerations. So you'll be able to find that. Again, there are differences on different states in phase 2 in the mitigation, but we want to continue recess. A lot of districts want to continue it. They know that's good for students. We need to have, some districts are not going to do it disinfecting on large play structures, but maybe at the end of the day, because out in the heat, the sun does cause a lower risk of exposure to this virus. So with that in mind, there are differing considerations. What we're saying is that the large structures of playground equipment probably shouldn't be used, but several stencils and things can be used on the playgrounds. If pods of rooms have separate buckets of activity equipment, as long as students aren't sharing that equipment, but they're choosing equipment to use that specific day for their own use. So it's going to be very similar to what you'd see in physical education, with physical distancing involved, with lack of sharing of equipment, with disinfecting of equipment between uses.
Thank you, Laura. We can take time for just one last question. If anyone wants to put one in the Q&A box. All right, so want to definitely thank our panelists, Tom, Laura, and Sean, for a great job as you guys discussed and really weighed in on the SHAPE America Reentry Guidelines. I definitely want to throw a shout out to Carly Wright and Michelle Carter, who had a lot to do with creating that document. Also, Joey Martelli for taking the time to spend with us on really helping us understand some of the verbiage and some of the things that were going on as the document was certainly being created. And I just want to let you guys know what's coming up next. This is kind of an exclusive thing. This came out of Tom's meeting with the SAM group. And we're going to be going live just like this on a webinar this coming Tuesday, June 30th at 2 o'clock Central, 3 o'clock Eastern time. And myself, Tom, and Joey Martelli, we are going to do a session on what's working now in social media And we're really going to focus specifically on strategies and outcomes. And by the end of it, what we're hoping to do is to give all of the states some insights as how you could be looking at social media across all the major platforms so that you guys can beef up your efforts in terms of your communication, building engagement, things like that. We're also going to be using some case studies that, from some things that we've done here at MOSHAPE, as well as also SHAPE America. And then last but not least on this, I just want to let you guys know, this is an exclusive presentation that we're going to be doing for the SAM group themselves. I'd like to say this to all the executive directors. When we send out, just in about a half hour, we're going to send out the invitation links for Tuesday. Please pass this along to your social media specialists, managers, or whatever you may call them. We certainly want them to be on board with this as well as, of course, you guys as executive directors, and certainly anyone from your leadership executive board. But this is going to be exclusive, and we want to thank you guys, you know, for obviously looking at coming on board with that social media session. With that, guys, we want to thank you guys all for tuning in today. This has been a lot of fun to do this. And again, if you guys have any questions, you got everyone's contact information. For our executive director, Tom Loughrey, Laura Beckmann, Sean Nevills, I am Guy Danoff. Again, we want to thank you for the special edition broadcast, bringing you the SHAPE America Reentry Considerations. We want to thank you guys for joining us right here on the MOSHAPE Media. Thank you.